We can start on it.
Okay. Welcome everyone. This is C City Conversations. My name is Anuj Daga, and I teach at the School of Environment and Architecture in Mumbai. And we are very happy to welcome you to C City's outreach program called C Conversations. As a part of this program, we organize events, lectures, symposia, and exhibitions in order to engage with the larger artistic and cultural discursive sphere within and outside the city. So it's a pleasure to have you all join this event. And this session, or rather this semester of C City events, is supported partly by Urban Center Mumbai. Just to give a brief background to Urban Center Mumbai, it's a part of the Urban Center Trust, which is a young not-for-profit organization established in 2020 by city practitioners. It's an organization which aims to build capacities and create democratic platforms to achieve and demonstrate excellence in the planning and design of rapidly urbanizing agglomerations in India. And as a part of this series, we have been kind of discussing and debating ideas around social design. And the title of this series is Building Agency, as many of you who are following us must have known. And the primary kind of idea behind Building Agency was to address the question of how does architecture become relevant for society today, and from two directions. First is that of spatial design, which means that the building, how do we understand ways in which our processes of building and the space of building kind of offers ways in which it can design and shape lives of people. But on the other hand, the title Building Agency also kind of points at how do we build our agency as architects. So this was the twofold idea that held the whole series together. And in this series, we have invited so far spatial practitioners who have been formulating visions, trajectories, questions, methods, and processes, through which environmental apparatus, so to say, can be configured afresh. And we are hoping that this series of discussions will allow us to take new directions in the sphere of contemporary spatial pedagogy and practice. And so far, we have had people from India as well as abroad, from the discipline of architecture, and curatorship. And today we have very interestingly an artist with us, and we have Dharmendra Prasad who will shortly give his presentation. But before that, I would like to read a small biography of him. Dharmendra Prasad is born in he likes to say that he's born in between stories, discrimination, hierarchies, chaos, and silence, full of winds and dust without any address, and he practices in the fields of Gangetic plains to the villages, water bodies, and rainforests of northeast India. He's based in Guwahati. He practices also in Bihar. And besides co-founding the Guwahati-based Anga Art Collective, he lives and practices between Bihar and Guwahati, like I said. And presently, he is developing a harvest school, which is a pedagogical process-based centering on ecology and agriculture. And his presentation will also kind of bring these deeply invested ideas today, which is called Ephemerality at the Threshing Floor, where he talks about what happens to spatiality when ephemerality knocks the door of life, and also how do uh, how do sites and fields become more fluid and conversant with each other. So with that note, I want to invite Dharmendra to give his presentation. Dharmendra, over to you. Welcome.
Thank you, Anuj. Hi, everyone. Myself, Dharmendra Prasad, I practice with space, sites, and different processes of image making. And here I would like to talk about the central energy of life and practice, that is the ephemerality, which I feel it's a realization from the fields that I constantly visit to read and to engage and to create insertions and introspections in the context of my practice and largely in the life. So I see the ephemerality as a central energy in the fields, and which holds the memories and experience that gets constructed through the intense presence of different kind of energies, and in which the ephemerality is the center. So ephemerality completes the circle of life. Therefore, it should complete the circle of culture as well as ideas. Life moves through the ephemeral conditions. Time is textured, time dies and reborn in the form of seasons, days, nights, morning, and evenings. Ephemerality is visible through bodies, sites, and ecological happenings. Therefore, ephemerality is a medium of life and practice. Now, I would like to present one observations from my field trips. So it's from a threshing floor of Mr. Hari Chauhan, a farmer from a village in Bihar. So just after when I knocked toil, I found myself slipping through a vast horizon of ephemerality. The slip is ephemeral, the dream is ephemeral, the sight is ephemeral. Spatiality evolves through ephemerality, through hunger, through collective toil, through machine, through human warmth. In threshing floor, practices exist beyond the notion of duration, mediums, and completion. As my dream were moving further, I encountered moistless dews falling at the late harvest site. Ephemerality gets constructed with the notion of time and notion of durability. Just before encountering the situation of a sleeping worker, I was engaged in other ecological distractions. Before sunlight reached at this threshing floor, I was there as a spatial intruder with a device called camera. The relationship between the body and camera was disturbed by the cold, foggy winds, dense textural sight, surprised farm tools, and the sound produced through walking on the hay. It means the site was aware about the presence of an intruder. The spatial intruder was busy in repositioning himself to get the radically meaningful frame. This is an incident of failure. The camera was unable to get inside the sleeping dream of a farm worker. The sight is more powerful and enigmatic than the industrial visions. This image is the result of a tussle between the threshing floor and an industrial tool, between the notion of ecological time and industrial time, between the ecological notion of comfort and industrial notion of comfort. So, like in the process of going to with different kind of observations that I made from my field visits. So here is another. It's about a tree, a mahua tree, which is one of the last mahua tree in a village. And this observation was made while I was constantly engaging with that tree on the level of observation and work. So how does a tree conceive the notion of time? What happens when a tree becomes generator of a human itinerary? I am an old mahua tree. Through the process of my blossom, affects human action. Later, those actions become cultural processes. Since my youth, I have devised itinerary for countless generations of this village. To people, I offer flowers, smells, moisture, time, as well as shadow. The most important entities of spatial imaginations. My flower turned into recipes, my smell turned into rituals. Flower and the smell are responsible for creation of spatiality. The spatial imaginations took place through need, not through seeking for icons. I am a mahua tree. As an eco-cultural machine, my responsibility is to push the ecological notion of time in the human working and thinking. Generations collects my flowers in early morning. I produce flowers as well as produce morning individuals. I am a cultural and conceptual watch. My flowers fall for 2 or 3 hours. People wait, collect, circumambulate, pause, and converse. Collecting and thinking through ecological notion of time is the most important action of now. A tree makes people wake up early in the morning. Further, push them into a meditative, slow, and long process of collecting flowers. Therefore, the presence of a tree in the life is beyond material and physicality. A tree is a time, health, recipe, pedagogue, and further leading to the specific spatial imaginations and creations. I am a mahua tree standing quiet and observing the shifts in materials and spatial consciousness of people around me. I have seen many generations. I have seen many distortions in folktales, songs, and soil. I am the storage device of time. I stand as complex fabric of habitation, sounds, smell, texture, and undercurrent of luxury and food. As a living example of ephemerality and flux, I am a future chair, a wooden pillar, a material for craft, and a traveler through fire, sleeping in graveyard. Further, like moving again with different imageries that I encountered and I produced and realized. So this is again an observation which I made in the process of producing this image in the village in Bihar, which is about like a relationship between the site and an unfertile grain. So here the grain talks about himself and says that what is the function of an unfertile grain in life? How does unfertile grain contributes in spatial thinking and local recipes? Unfertile grain makes sites and becomes the agrarian residues, extends the character of threshing floor, and produce fire in the local kitchens. Harvest residues turns into fire. A kitchen is impossible without fire. Fire is architecture. Agriculture is fire. So this is the image of the performance that was happened in 2 different places. One was in Kochi, one was in near Guwahati in Dipurbil area. And on these photographs and experiences of those performances that were done, I made some notes about it, which is more about like waiting and the possibility of the agriculture as a site of pedagogical imagination. So fields basically makes us to wait. Waiting is like harvesting. In the process of work, wait is the most important fuel. Farming is the process of wait after toil and toil after wait. How does the notion of wait placed in the process of spatial thinking and imagination? Is it placed through occupational gestures in the field? A site is constructed through wait. Field are the results of wait. Waiting create pause situations. Waiting is doing something. Waiting is about allowing the process to take place. Waiting is about allowing the ecological notion of time to get empowered. Masanobu Fukuoka's natural farming is about waiting. Waiting is about surrendering human brain in front of a field. And this leads to the pedagogical explorations further. So again, coming to the field situation and how the fields are like getting transformed in time, and how the notion of field is also like getting altered with the human presence and the presence of need and the greed. So in the field, dust fly away with the pressure of raindrops and becomes the momentary mud. A tree in the field of ignorance hesitates to deliver her fruits through flowers. So I have also wrote a very short bio of a field, in which the field says that I'm boiling, constantly getting ruined and teared apart in every season. I reshaped and poisoned to become picturesque. I witnessed river of blood. Inside me flows the river and fractured limbs. I hosted times and pains. I became a site to experiment turbulent. My skin turned dry in the river. So talking about like the habitation and the understanding of material, and how the incidents leads to different kind of material realizations in creating the functional utilitarian things in life. So in this hut was like, I encountered this hut in my village, and um, it was okay, like, but a cyclone, a very wind came like almost like a cyclone, and it almost destroyed the half part of the hut. And then how people um, realize difference materiality to create, to hold that function, to create their habitation, or to save their habitation. So with that, I also made an observations and some notes uh, about it. And so this is a hut on time, species, and season from village. And around rough fingers, warmth of generations and collective psyche, I stand as a post-threshing floor utility. So when human needs, dreams, and greed gets over around me, then a bird, 100 ants, and insects extend my form, layering me with different functionalities. Later, I am shaped by the loo, rains, and the winds. My life is designed by death. I am domesticated crop and a vertical extension of agrarian dreams. My shivering skin is seeking warmth and heat of your rough fingers. Bring fire to my innocence and cyclone to the pillars of my ego. So while taking the different journeys of making and realizing imageries in the field, this is another example of um, how image gets realized through very minute manipulations. And it's also about field and toil, and also bodies and burden. Fields are deteriorating as soil as well as atmosphere. Fields turn as the site for industrial experimentation. A plow in the field destroys the habitation as well as constructs the human kitchen. A field becomes kitchen just before moving into the countless stomachs. A field is the site where crops grows and dies together. Field is the architecture as well as the battlefield between various living organisms. A field is the mute evidence of blood and floods. So in the process of my research in the field, I also like encountered and talked with a lot of people, farmer and craft persons. And in the process, I make a lot of observational notes. So uh, this is a cultivator's note, or one can say a field situation, in which it is also about the field and its energy, how its energy flow through light, through germination of hunger, through sprouting photosynthesis in the mind, through capital and material cycle. In the corner of an old farmer's experience, I saw a vast field swimming for years. I stand in the last field of knowledge, which exists on the bank of a polluted water body. I went there in the early morning and received by the last wind. My body weight transformed to polluted soil through my tired feet. After the long walks for Ethiopia, I was tired and arrived at the field of conflicts. Conflicts and knowledge were sown in the same field. Conflicts and knowledge gets cultivated as a mixed crop in the field of life. So this was another sculptural insertion in Deeperbill, which is in water body almost 10 to 15 kilometers away from the Guwahati, where I worked on a site that was a construction site, which was banned due to some legal issues. And I went there and I realized this form as a marker, as a pencil, which is basically changing the different landscapes with it. And there I went, and the aim was to understand the machine in context and layered it with the possibility of meanings. So I'm left with the drawing memories and many queries after that. So a mechanical form camouflaging the other dominant and hidden. It is about construction of landscape, construction of agricultural space, construction of hunger, construction of concrete and agrarian spaces. The contested, conflicted, and abandoned construction site become the context for this site-oriented sculptural intervention. The form become the habitat of earlier and layered meaning. The form is an extension of the agricultural space in vertical form, lifting the landscape a little closer to the sky. And in the same village with a very long durational performative exercise, this is also about waiting and holding and behind, and in the agricultural field of one of the last agricultural field of the Hirapara village in Azara near Guwahati. So it's talk about what lies beyond horizon. Is it another field or another horizon that is there? I was standing all day waiting for a fish and a wild grass to learn. Horizon blooms after philosophy meets many times. Wet sky sleeping inside a rejected, useless grain. A ocean is stuck within a lake. Wilderness is stuck within the notion of property. A bird migrated inside her eggs. I migrated to toil through fields. A grain is looking for a hungry stomach. While standing behind horizon, I'm waiting for another field. So this was the observational note that I made in the process of after experiencing the performance. So this is about a fisherman on performance and at the Deeperbill site. So it says that what is the linearity of pain and tiredness? How this linearity of pain and tiredness can contribute to define the performance and spatiality. Performance in daily life and rural occupations exist with repetitions. This happens due to the need, climate, and seasons. The architecture in the time performed through decay. Decay becomes the time, and time becomes decay. Materials and structures are the carriers of time. Performance happens through time, and body is the only carrier of decay. So a fisherman is waiting at Deeperville, a huge fishing structure owned by a fisherman from Keutpara village is devised, designed, and displaced. A fisherman's goal is to think through concentration, balance, weight, repetition, and target. A fish's goal is to think through scape in the context of a water body. A performer's goal is to think through the network within an ecosystem. The history of performance art is the history of gestures, materials, moments, events, and emotion, staged through itineraries and timelines, and provocations, layered with disciplines produced by human body placed in the center. This human-centric definition and practice become a category, a discipline in so-called radical aesthetic inquiries. So performance art history moves towards so-called progression and lacks decay because it is momentary and fixed within an event. History is always seen in linearity. Performance history is human-centric. Viewers and performers are human. Non-living entities are props. A fisherman working on Dhekijal in Dorabil is a daily act of a human body and a bamboo structure. Both bodies are moving towards decay. Both bodies are working in tandem to catch a fish from a water body. Therefore, a performance processes exist between the complex network of living and non-living entities. What is the intensity of pain of non-living structure in the fishing process? So again, like similar kind of like performative exercises were happened on the bank of water body, in which a fisherman basically talks about the landscape, about the water body. So while traveling to picturesque, I paused for introspection. I was little faster than introspection. Therefore, I landed in darkness. In the absence of introspection, darkness gets deeper. And in the absence of darkness, introspection blossoms. I want to be like a fishing structure, a water body, introspective and fragile. Where does fragility goes to a side? How long is the journey to introspection? How many forests and water bodies I need to cross to get to the introspective situation? So this was again a creation of a place within a place, a very temporal place for a few days, almost a week, and where people used to come, and there were different kind of objects and manipulated objects, and they were like asking me to take the photographs of themselves by holding. And so this was more of like a studio photo studio situation from the agrarian and agricultural perspective. And for that I also made some notes and observations after this experience. So how spatiality basically remains in its temporal character through design inquiries. Imagining the field as drawing board, what could be the notion of habitat in the crop field? How does the notion of time gets defined within a field? After returning from the infinite fields, I find you dancing in hunger inside my stomach. All my life, I plow the books to liberate myself from the famine of knowledge. Then I went to fields. There I followed tiny red ants, and learned slowness. Residue of your smell reached to me slowly in the form of promise. A rainforest refused to moisten my nerves, and I remained thirsty all my life. So this is also like about sight and the possibility of pedagogy. So in her last flow, a solitary river tired just before reaching at a thirsty village. How much flow makes a river? When all rivers will die, then I will travel inside me in search for a calm water body. There, I will build a structure to feast visions. In dark nights, I sleep on water to converse with fishes, frogs, and mosquitoes. In morning, I plow the river with my hunger. Plowing a river within us is a pedagogical process without any syllabus. How much flows makes a syllabus? How much flow makes a river? Again, in the another context of performance in the field, this is from Bihar. So as I began to navigate in the field of life, my days began to scatter in distraction. As a farmer of time, I began to harvest introspection. I failed many times, and in those failures, I experienced momentary point of beliefs. After opening the window of belief, I encountered another field of distraction. I sat near as I sat near an old grass and began to ask about the dimensionality of spread grief. The old grass whispered in my ear. My ignorance and unconsciousness got blended. I lost the chance to concentrate on a fragile season. I unlearned spatial dimensions and durability from an old grass and fragile season in the field of distraction. All habitations exist through fragile season. All seasons are passing in the clutches of smoke. Habitation is fragility. Smoke is architecture. Spatiality is seasons. So here I wrote an autobiography of the field. After doing this work, which was meant for a play by written by Amy Sichar, A Tempest in the University of Hyderabad while I was studying there. So it's talk about, the field is talking about himself. So as the agricultural field of this earth, I plow thousand times with grief and blood. How deep I am, whose blood is in me. All the roots and bloods travel to the core of this earth, and beyond crust, I exist in celestial bodies. Universe is a field of grief. I exist in the gap between hunger and soil. I exist in the gap between walking conflicts. I cultivate bodies and rest in all the breathing lines and dark green veins. A wilderness turns into property. I am a cultivator of cells, and I sleep like a tired and toxicated soil in the lower corner of your belly. I cultivate the black soil of hunger and need. I cultivate the fields in uncountable stomachs. I cultivate time. Who is the field? Who is cultivator? Who is cultivating home? Whose autobiography it is? So this is the work that I did while I was in Bihar in the lockdown time last year. So the work called the biography of a field. It's an 8 minute 40 seconds video, and this is a still of that video. And this work was an outcome of regular conversation with the field, between the field and me. So I was going with notebook and doing a lot of note making and observing the field, the physical details, and also like the philosophical details. So biography of field is basically flawed as a semi-fictional take on the ongoing environmental, occupational, behavioral, and psychic shift in the village. The work sprouts after the friction between the notion of knowledge and emotional energies in the non-living, between the weight and hunger, between the season and greed. Greed as the constant energy in the human civilization. The work was realized as a process of a lonely and long tillage in time, in season, in crisis, in solitude, and in an afternoon around the fields and trees in the village. An afternoon walk through fields sprouts the work situation, germinating the cells of body, the gesture, and the breathing tone of the field was chased by the muted observer with a cell phone camera in the solitude. So this is another image of that video that I made. And talking about the field, the relationship between the field and the pedagogical possibilities that I'm investigating, I conceived an workshop method process, which is called Harvest School, which focuses on producing the idea of care and inclusivity by unlearning and imperial attitudes, colonial practices, nationalistic and industrial way of thinking and working. It is a process to realize and create the possibility of non-capital ways of living by becoming the seed of the coming time, cultivated and being taken care of through toil, patience, and wait. As an eco-rural mechanics, Harvest School placed in the harvest fields, riversides, post-harvest side, under the tree, nights and days at different light intensities and in multiple geographical, ecological, and cultural location. Harvest School thinks through season, land, forest, wind flow by immersing in larger ecological machines. So this fluid and fragile post-studio condition attempts to rethink the time and ways of living by practicing through the pedagogical, aesthetic, and ecological. The school practices harvest as a philosophical and futuristic possibility, which is largely influenced by the condition of the village, rural occupations, and technology. So this is one of the example of the harvest school session that we did in Santiniketan in 2020. So in this, we went to the field and with some body gestures, we make mark on the field and then we elevated the mark vertically to get this structure. And after experiencing that, I also make some of the notes. So in these sessions, which was conducted under the Mango Tree project at Santiniketan. So the school function as a reverse insemination towards human mind to create the site of potential and potential of time through toil, care, and countering distractions. The intention is to plow beyond the notion of knowledge, production, and distribution, and work out to imagine the pasture of emotional toil and theatricality, centering ecology and relationship. So the emphasis was on the emotional and intellectual publication of ideas to develop fertile crescent for therapeutic pedagogy of life. So this is the way that through different body exercises and movements, we get to realize this structure and we build it collectively. And we spent a night there and did like a lot of exercise around the idea of the darkness and the night. So nights, field textures, forms and shapes of trees, acoustic ecology of the soil, roots, and intensity of lights and times. Observational and analytical takes folds of the breathing lines, slowing down and becoming anti-mechanical through the process of sleep, discomfort, weight, and care. So this context and material were realized at the source, the resources of framing the understanding about the unstructured workshop method at the harvest school. So in the process of unlearning, the attempt was to dissolve in the process and texture of weather, time, intensity of light, dark, and theatricality to fuel the energies and take positions for plumbing the harvest methodology as a model for the way of living. With the flow and blockages, the experiences and structured visions steadily and quietly began to till up the sides, began to transform into the photosynthesis of plants, and old trees began to lift up with the memory in relation to spread knowledge, began to get sharper, moist, warmer, and intense with light and dark. So in another spatial creation with different kind of objects, this image is from the MMB Max Muller Bhavan, Kolkata, where like I was there to create some spatial insertions with this material, and I make another note after that, which was about like the field situation. It was very difficult to really take these materials and get into that kind of sophisticated cultural space with this and then like, so it was more of like in contrast. So a wind was unable to flow due to the clutches of grief. Mixed with blood and water, a lump of clay turned into red mud. A betel tree remains a silent observer, but the objects get scattered with trauma. Flood failed to wash away the grief with her fresh alluvial sediment, and rain fails to moisten life. A stubborn hill flooded the valley with his tears, erasing the tired tributaries of a shameless river. So this was another project at Max Muller Bhavan in Delhi. So it was also like taking this material and inserting it there and extending that space from the agrarian perspective and like everyday perspective, everyday rural perspective. So this was structured. It's like there was also like a video projection, and around this structure and the video, there was a lot of performative exercises and events that went. And I wrote a little note about it, in which the time becomes the element of uncertainty, sight becomes a place of nowhere, the body becomes the machine in reverse gear, and energy becomes the tool to generate exclusiveness. And in all this, a place die and sight re-emerge from the position of orthodoxy. So the project was named Late Harvest, which sprouts as a sculptural architectonic situation to engage through the photosynthesis of waiting, slowing down, being quiet, and to think and dream in the situation of disturbed sight conditioning. The project happens through generating collective toil for a week to create a sense of place by emphasizing on harvesting and threshing the anti-historical weight and care as needful actions in time. So this was another insertions in a very sophisticated architectural site in Delhi, in which I worked with the idea of flow, and the water becomes the central element, and it touches different architectural segments of that building with the use of plumbing technique and create different imageries and objects for engagement. So working with the concept of fluidity in the relation with the site conditioning, occupational narratives, and material culture, the work becomes the post-harvest site itself, in which the element of water and the notion of flow breathe as its soul. This is the beginning of like, because I trained as a painter in art school. So the beginning of the project was, this project was very simple painterly situation, using mud on fabric and creating different kind of imageries, then how it goes turned into more functional, functional and fragile, habitation, or one can say architecture of a house or a home, in which I use different images, painted images to design this functional space. And it also leads to create different possibilities of performance. So this work was for the project of called Assembly of Desire in Mazuli, in which the idea was to build a structure for hosting seminar in the field. And so I went there in the village called Futuki, and the field was in waiting. And the field was in waiting. It was also shifting and deteriorating from within. And in the Futuki village, on an island called Mazuli, which is, I call it an island of chaos and vice versa, with overloaded neighborhood dreams, is in continuous flux at a site of contestation into practices, philosophies, and anti-philosophies of its inhabitants and beyond. Air, light, time, bamboo, straw, soil, and toil weaved together to form a structure for multiple desires. Air which touches and travels in between. The growing structure turns into a free space, a site unbordered and unfluid. The structure fragments the landscape into multiple frames, shapes and future experiences by lifting the harvest side paddy field little closer to the sky. A design conceived by generation and born collectively grew in between the paddy fields, people and silence, on an island getting reduced in the time. So these are the images of that particular structure that was growing up there. So I fell from the sky and stuck in the philosophical famine, a butterfly flapping her wings on a dying flower. Further, I saw many wounded crops, rivers, and forests in the eye of a harvester. When all machines failed, then a field needed human warmth. A dewdrop crushed between the hammer and stone. Dryness flooded the fields of wounded times. A dewdrop rolls down towards valley, crossing uncountable leaves and flowers before turning into a water. This was a small note that I made after that. And this is the last year project in which I try to devise, extend the pedagogical conceptions through the notion of mobility and how mobility can become an important practice in the time where things were not moving. I'm talking about the lockdown and this COVID situation. So in that time, I was really trying to be mobile in many ways. So this project titled Care Biosphere, which is about ongoing environmental repair as the new reality and the dreams of other species versus notion of development and dreams of human crisis versus ecological repair crisis, opening up possibilities to rethink non-human species as sustainable partners, human control and wind flow, water flow and soil flow. So forest in relation to cultivation and learning and cleaning the crop of knowledge. The shift in the notion of human as a tiny participant in the ecological happening to the controller of it, greed as the constant energy of present, and care as the most needful action of now. So in that project, we devised a vehicle which is titled as Roving Archive. So Roving Archive is the title of the mobile structure is a mobility situation, and the title of the mobile structure, a deep care vehicle inspired from multiple situations of mobility in agriculture and forms of insects and agrarian tools like soil worms, locusts, and tractors. Roving archive work as a deep care vehicle to harvest and generate deep care situations and stories from the fields. The vehicle moves to the fields, harvest sites, under the trees, and all kind of rural occupations sites immersed in the occupational situations to begin informal conversation around ecology, time, rurality, food, culture, education, etc. So in the process of that, so this is the image of that particular vehicle that we designed. And in this another exercise in that particular project, we went to trees that were like left unchopped. So roving archive went under a pair of old trees, once the part of a large mango garden. These two trees left unchopped in memory of a son by his father, and the rest were chopped out for various socioeconomic reasons. The day-long processes began with eating while drawing and drawing while eating. So the direct relationship between young crops and body eliminated the notion of kitchen from eating. The process also blurs the boundaries between what is working time and what is break time. What is art studio, what is kitchen, what is crop field, what is learning, and what is eating. Unrecognizable wild grasses, edible soft and sharp crops, young wheat plants, yellow mustard flowers, and many unrecognizable wild leaves were brought to make a mark of a place. The place once a huge mango garden, and now a vast agrarian field, once a vertical pillar of food, and now a horizontal rice bowl. The intention was to spend the time with the crop habitations, short life of crops, muted grief of the two trees, their age, experience, dreams, and worries. As standing ecological entities, the true tree becomes the signifier of someone's memory and someone's greed beyond their usual ecological role. In the same project, we went to develop another exercise, and this was with children in the village. And the aim of this session was to trace the flight lines of birds through drawings. Like in the process, we encountered chickens and their movements as a line of walk to take. Participants walk on the line led by chickens and their nature of work and routine. The chickens' constant movements in harvest side in search of food, play, fun, and rest resulted in a complex map which took participants to the unknown spatial realities in the harvest sites. A non-human and domesticated process becomes the pencil to map the agrarian side. A non-human need conducted a pedagogical session. So in the fields, basically, there are also pauses in between the toil, in between the work, and I'm really very much interested in those pauses, those breaks, which is I call it a do nothing situation, which is basically inspired from the philosophy of Masanobu Fukuoka when he talks about do nothing processes in the process of agriculture. And with that philosophy, like I try to see the field from that angle and try to trace the do nothing situations in the process of agriculture and site realizations and site making. So there are some examples, as an old tree is doing nothing or will do something to become the reason for its death. A harvest site is waiting, resting, because the tools are busy in other works. Tight schedule results in do nothing situation for the harvest site in wait. Waiting becomes do nothing. Do nothing becomes wait. So haystacks are doing nothing because they are in collective rest. Paddy straws are not busy because they don't practice the capitalist notion of time. A paddy harvester takes pauses in between his work. A pause situation becomes rest point in the process of toil. Therefore, a toiling process is also about doing nothing. The empty agrarian field, when not in use, does nothing. A situation of self-healing and self-repair leads to do nothing situation. Take your body and mind in a residual situation. The body as a leftover entity. The residual situation of the body, not as a neglected situation, but as a possibility to counter the capitalist character of life school. Greed in life leads people to say that I'm doing nothing. So this is another exercise of the harvest tool in which the monsoon becomes and the rain becomes the central pedagogue to create this drawing. So there is a field of a playground. In the summer, basically that playground is basically dry very hard. And when it rains, it becomes softer. So whenever it was raining, we were going together and making some marks there. And so if it does not rain, you cannot draw. So with the soil referred as the softest spatial condition and monsoon as mark maker, the decision of making and erasing was beyond our reach. While making and erasing, the fear of not being lost in the categories, exclusions, or history, the monsoon opens up its vastness for imagining the unstructured learning. What it means to lost and learn and lost. How learning gets manifested in the lost form. How the form lostness can be appreciated in contrast with the notion of mainstream and history. Monsoon line turned as an organic process where seasons directed the act of making and erasing. He is Sadhu Yadav from Basoli village in Bihar, and he built this storage, fodder storage house for his cattle to store fodder, wheat fodder, and paddy fodder. So I was having a conversation with him, and from that conversation, I made some note here, which I'm going to read. So while digging deep into the unmoved entities throughout his life, farmer Sadhu Yadav of Basoli village deeply narrated his interest to build khop. Khop is a wheat fodder storage. You can see it in the background. So khop has its origin in realization of toil and materials through ecology for the basic need of human and vice versa. Through the flux in time, the architectural form reduced only to a wild grass. The toil is erased in time, leaving the body in solitude, in walking, in sitting, in breathing without dreams. I took the journey towards entities and arrived at the reservoir of visions. I toil long to build the storage house of care. So this is we're going like I'm doing research and field visit in a Deeperville area and trying to develop possibility of the harvest school in that particular area. So in the winters when the water gets reduced, um, there are also like people do some agricultural stuffs and create paddy fields in the 3 villages, and I'm looking at those fields and also like studying about and talking to people. And this is the note from the visit from to the visit to the site. So a railway track bisects the stomach of a water body. 3 elephant corridors leads to a huge bowl of food. When human presence and the hunger of elephants accidentally meet, the railway track turns into the elongated river of blood. What happens when hunger absorbs the water body? What happens when length and breadth of a water body is explored in search of food, luxury, and comfort? Cultural processes begin from the need of food. Elephants' need for food creates corridors. These corridors are cultural markers on the land, resulted because of observation, focus, togetherness, and hunger of non-human. Can animals, as cultural producers, counter the presence of excessive human marks on spatial manipulations? Dipperville has become a claustrophobic water body due to the dense presence of human marks in and around it. A railway track cuts the Dipperville from eastern and southern sides, injecting industrial and mechanic presence in the form of sound and mechanical mobility. Encroachment is the action of greed, agriculture is the action of need. So this is another plan for hosting the harvest school in the different village at the same water body in the Dipperville. So this is from the Hirapara village, which has a last agricultural field. And I made a very small note about it. And some questions: how does a field intrude into a habitat or vice versa? Fields are extensions of built environment, extensions of kitchen, recipes, smells, crops, and hunger. Hunger becomes the extension of the stomach into land. Looking for the possibility to extend the last field of Hirapara village into multiple direction of reading and forgetting. Yes. So thank you so much. So these were the notes and observation and experiences that I note down from my practice. Now I offer to Anuj.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Dharmendra. You can actually stop sharing if you can. On the bottom bar, you will get a option for stop sharing, where the
Okay.
Zoom controls are. If you're not getting, it's okay. Can you see me though?
Yeah, I can see. I can see. Let me
Okay,
try.
okay. So that's fine then. Don't bother. So thank you, Dharmendra. I mean, all throughout your presentation, I was feeling that this is going to be such a difficult conversation because you have grown up almost in fields, and I've grown up in a city like Mumbai, and our orientations therefore are so different, and our growing up experience is so contrasting, that because I think we harvest our metaphors for living from the surroundings that we grow in. So right from the beginning you spoke about the fact of this ecological notion of comfort versus industrial notion of comfort, and I think that was a very hard hitting phrase right in the beginning for me. And I would like you to kind of slightly elaborate on that how did you come to understand the difference between the two? And now I'm feeling more and more guilty that my notion of comfort is completely generated in the background of the industrial notion. So if you can expand on that idea, and how you came to realize this very essential difference.
I think like this realization is came to me with like the regular visits to the field. I also like first 10 year of my life, I grew up in village, then I moved to city. Then so like I have like these two experiences of like, growing in a village and also growing in the city. And I really don't see these binaries that exist in reality, in practicality, and also in terms of functionality. And talking about this two notion of comfort and ecological and industrial notion of time as well, it started with the idea of, again, coming back to the idea of fragility and ephemerality.
Mm.
There are undercurrents of these notions to the idea of ephemerality. And we as a human being try to avoid the ephemeral conditions. We try to avoid our death, we try to avoid, that's why we try to stick to the idea of long durational things and permanence and things like that, which is an illusion in the human psyche. And these differences comes when I make constant visits and makes notes, makes observations, and like talk to the non talk to the wildlife, you can say, or talk to the things that are non-living, or observing a tree and imagining that tree as a situation of cohabitation, and or as a teacher, imagining the tree as a teacher, or imagining the water body as a teacher, or so like these ideas and these observations and realizations comes from my constant visit into the fields. And also, like, I have a memory of, like, being in the village for 10 years of my life, initial 10 years of my life. And that really helps. Also compares like what I am now and what I was then, in terms of like what kind of spaces I was inhabiting, what kind of occupations I was inhabiting, what kind of, like, belief systems I was inhabiting, and what kind of belief systems I am inhabiting now. So there is a difference, there is a kind of like a gap, and there is also connection. And these differences, gaps and connections leads to do that kind of thinking. And that also becomes the philosophical sides where I get realization of these two binaries, one I can say.
Right. One more thing that you constantly kept on mentioning throughout your presentation is the idea of pedagogy. And if I understand correctly, pedagogy is about ways of teaching and ways of learning. So, what if you? I mean, I could understand that the field allows you to harvest a lot of metaphors for life, for everyday living. But how do you translate them into pedagogical processes? So,
Like, for example, talking about that particular exercise in which like those drawings on the soil surface were like directed by the rain.
mm,
It's not the human presence is not the central in that exercise, though it seems central, but it's not central. It's there at the periphery. Like, the human presence is there, but it's at the periphery, it's very peripheral, and it's not the central, because if the rain is not going to happen, you cannot then go and do and drawing that, you cannot go and make mark on the soil. So that particular moment, like those moments, I'm really interested in those kind of moments in the field also.
mm,
And field provides those kind of moments a lot. And also, like, seeing the field and agrarian occupations and processes and all kind of materials that are related with it, mm, as as a site of pedagogy, because uh, also, like, the way we live in our own educational system, look at the schools and all these things, that what are their what is the goal of the knowledge, and like, is our educational system is producing any knowledge? If it is producing knowledge, then where it is going, and what is happening to it? Like, what is the goal of, like, knowledge production? More than knowledge production, I think it's important to concentrate on sharing, and and also, like, rethink about the idea of, like, Knowledge for what?
Hmm.
Knowledge for, like, defining the time or speeding up the narrative, or knowledge for, like, little slowing down and observing, and knowledge for another knowledge production, or knowledge for production of capital, or knowledge for production of, like, what, crime, violence, like,
Hmm.
what kind of thing. So that is the another thing that I started, like, this interested in the school systems and all kind of, like, pedagogical system that exist in the mainstream pedagogy. And so I thought, like, where I will go now.
Hmm.
And so therefore I was having memory, I was having my own family's occupational history. I was having my grandfather's experience of 80 years in the field,
Hmm.
and those things becomes the pillar for me to hold on for the possibility of imagining the pedagogy.
Hmm. 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 So, so you are saying that, I mean, um, I just want to open up the question of desire here. You are like, I mean, I don't know how precisely to frame it, but let me just attempt. Um, do you think that field could be the generator of desire and purpose in one's life?
Yes, I feel like it's the generator of desire, definitely. That's why we are. That's why we're changing the landscape.
Hmm.
It's the generator of material desire, but I want to say it could be a generator of philosophical desire as well,
Hmm.
and that positionality is very important. Definitely, yes, it's in sight for production of, like, multiple desires, and that is why we are in this complex situation.
And in fact, I was thinking uh, whether you were pointing at the other direction, because I mean, is the field about anti-desire? Because you constantly spoke about the idea of immersing oneself in toil, to get tired and therefore to kind of forget, in some sense, the whole notion of desire itself. So I was just wondering at the end, that is the philosophy of the field, anti-desire. Uh,
Anti-desire is also a kind of desire, one can say.
yeah,
Like,
true.
so, yes, talking about toil is, for me, I see toil, the process of toil, as it's a very, very important action in human life, and
Hmm.
also the physical toil, which is,
Hmm.
I feel like, very important, because fields need that, and
Hmm.
also we need that. Our body need that physical toil
Hmm.
to also counter these health problems and things like that. But the process of toil is also very philosophical. There are also pauses, and it needs patience. It needs balance. It needs communication between the farmer and the oxen and the plow. It needs, like, a particular balance, and it needs also a force. It needs energy. It needs weight. It needs also thinking, and it also needs an very, very, very important, like, what I observe from the field is the design thinking that a toil incorporate within it. And I'm really interested in that part of, like, design thinking, and how the toil holds the possibility of pedagogy.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I mean, you did mention about, very, very interestingly, the field as the architecture between human beings and other species. And I really enjoyed the way in which you brought out care, as this very interesting and important function which one can study from this pedagogy. Um, uh, I think I think these were my kind of learnings, and I will take a lot of time to revisit your presentation and chew and ruminate upon your lovely metaphors that you brought out. We have some some questions and some responses in our Q&A box. So I'm going to open it to the audience and going to read it out to you. We have one comment from Supriyo Manna. He says, while listening to you, I realize that you are not only feeling for the soil, but you have a soft corner for the proletariat who toils around it. I want to know a little bit more about your understanding of the ever growing population and its relation with the soil. Along with this, if you can explain your observation of the relation between the harvesters and the consumers.
Yeah, like it's a very important thing. Um, Definitely, there are a lot of hierarchical and unequal distribution of like land resources in India, and it leads to this gap between the harvesters and consumers, like who is consuming, who is harvesting, who is farmer, and who is toiler. So who toils in the field? The plow, the ox, the human body, or the zamindar who never go to the field. So this is a very complex, complex situation of defining who is toiler and who is consuming it. So industrial agriculture is basically about like people produce for market. And so the area of consumption becomes very, very broad in that way. And it's not only about consumption of food. There are also like different complexities, the caste and many hierarchies, gender. So it's a very complex process. The way agriculture is being shifted in this recent time in India, especially in my village, it becomes very complex and very complex activity and very contested activity. So yes, it's a really complex situation, and it's a very difficult thing to really say that how many people are producing, how many people are consuming, what are the relationship between them, what are the condition of like economy, how many like the producers are getting their benefits or not. Like all these are issues, and these issues can be dealt on the policy level, I think, like because I have a different angle of interest in the field, more of like in philosophical, but these questions are also very important with that about the hierarchy and the things, because that is why the field is a site of contest. It's not an romantic site where you can go and observe and make notes and do things and come out of that. So I understand, because in my village there are a lot of farmers who knows farming, who have the experience, who have all kind of farming tools. They're producers, but they are landless, but they're farming. So there is a lot of layers to define who is a farmer. It's a very complex scenario and situation. Even I don't know like who is a farmer. It's very difficult. It's very difficult to say.
There's a small question from Rishabh Chhajar, who is asking about the chairs in your works, artworks. He's saying, where did the form of the chair come from?
Like in my village, in my house, I was having 4 chairs, which was brought by my father. And I started working with that. So maybe because from that exercise, these are coming. But these chairs are like, because these are the plans for the project. So there could be other additions of other objects that is going to happen when I will construct the real site or the real structure.
And what is the intent behind covering them up in hay or in weeds?
It's more of like trying to overtake something.
Okay.
It's not covering, it's like also challenging, overtaking, like camouflaging your present from
Okay.
past, or past to present, or covering something which you don't want to see.
Prasad has a question. Prasad, if you can please come in. You are mute, huh?
Thanks, Dharmendra. Very nice. And I think very important intervention also, in the sense that uh, that like this whole idea of uh, using toil or work that you say to create forms uh, from material with your own kind of hands, and then that can become a container, that can become a space, that can become furniture, that can become whatever, and it then slowly dissolves itself, and then you kind of you make another one, you go to another, you know, so that is a very important I think shift you are offering for architects, for as architects. For last 100 years or so, we've been thinking about permanence, permanent things. We've been thinking about private things. We've been thinking about resisting nature, things to make things which are not changeable, to make things which are, which will live beyond your life. It's a very property idea of form, actually, that um, make something which will last, which will remain permanent, which will kind of, and what you are offering from your installations is a way of engaging with the environment in a in a in a manner in which you dance with the energy of the environment. You dance with the energies that are there. I was thinking, if, like, I come from a city studies, urban studies background, I was thinking that if we have to kind of start dancing with the energy of the city, and gather that uh, uh, that that idea which is not property, but idea which will keep changing, which will be other ideas of privacy, other ideas of uh, time. Then how could we kind of think about these forms? And one thing that comes to mind is, the pandals and the temporary installations that happen at a large scale, and at large scale in the sense many happen at one time, and many kind of, a lot of urban life is lived in that, actually. So for us, the city becomes the field also, to kind of figure out ways in which one can. And if I look very closely, actually, uh, across Indian cities at least, I mean, and also other cities, people are doing this constant building, rebuilding, changing, uh, appropriating, shifting. They are kind of doing that, and it's kind of it it offers a possibility. So I was thinking, like, when even when Anuj was asking the question, this whole idea of permanence, no, that you dismantle that and kind of, you work around a possibility which is beyond that, and that gives clues to probably many people who are working with environment today, because environment has become our important object for architectural thinking today, and in many ways the idea of environment seems to be hijacked with the idea of energy, that very, very, very closed idea of energy, the idea of embodied energy, the idea of sustainability, etc., etc., etc. But what you're saying is that if you change the mode of thinking, then you can work with the energies, with these flows, with these uh, songs of of the flows, and you can still figure out ways in which things can be. You can still think of spatial interventions. I think it's a very important, offering that you make for an architectural school. Actually, it's very, very important shift that you are proposing for architecture. It's not about trying to save the environment, but trying to dance with the environment. It's like it's that, because that's a shift you're offering, and I think that's an important shift that uh, uh, that we felt also. So thank you. I mean, it's just an observation I felt. Just a kind of a thing that goes on. I just want to know one question, that in your own installations, what happens to these, to this grass, to this plants, to the hay, to the after the project gets over, after the show is over, so to say, what happens?
Like in Delhi, what happens to the grass is, I told the NMB people that maybe they stored it somewhere, and then after that, some other, those were also like used in some other projects. In the villages, basically, all the grasses were eaten by the cows and buffaloes, and sometimes um, people also take those, and but it's in the cities. When I do projects in the cities, basically it has its own economic value. So maybe sometimes somebody can also like take it back from where I brought it. So this happens.
Because that uh, not cycle, but that that part of what happens to the material after work, after the toil, and then where does it go, and where does it kind of, where does it, how does it kind of, where does it go, and what happens to it? I think that is an important cycle also, probably, to think about, that where does that, what is the next life of that material, like what is the
Yes, that's very, very important. So like it has its own like economic angle if it's in the city. If it's in the village, then because this material is available everywhere. So in the villages, many times I get it for almost, I won't pay for like these things. So it's everywhere, and I can ask somebody, I can get it. So if like they have like a bunch of material, so they can give some from that. And then also if I done my work, then again I give them back, or somebody can take it from there. So this happens like for their own different kind of uses and functions. So it goes in that way, that directions.
But is there excess of this material in the rural scapes? Like, and what do they do of the excess?
No, like in the rural spaces, like there is a very important, like economy that is that happens around this material. So because agrarian process gets a lot of like mechanical insertions, like harvesting process, and also so these materials these days people burn in the fields. So
Right.
when you are using the harvester, you are not cutting the paddy with your hand. That means you are not getting the paddy straw, full paddy straw, the plant. So if you are cutting with the harvester, you only get the grains.
Oh,
And
is
those
it?
people and those people who don't have fields, they don't do agriculture, they have only cows and buffaloes. So they go to the field, they cut those straws and bring them back to feed their cattle. So that is the another process. So like there is also a shifting and complexities around it, around this material that goes. People make houses. We used to like in my own house in the village. Um, my grandmother used to burn and cook food using this straw, and there are also like a lot of craft that has been like emerged functional objects in the villages, and also it is used for making bed. People used to sleep on these. So like there are a lot of multiple functions that still exist in the villages.
Nice. There's one more comment by Rishabh Chhajjar. He says that you're also bringing the ideas of durability by the fluidity of fields, where one often relates it with the phenomena, with the permanence and having a long life. The fields and sites that we saw today had their own life, and their inhabitations lie in the stories and poetics. Is this a is it cyclical or temporal? And what is this fluid spatiality? Like, he's asking, do you think of, how do you think of this cyclicness? Is it in the kind of continuance, or is it in the idea of coming back to the same thing?
I think it's more about uh, like getting into the process of um getting in the process through the idea of ephemerality, because the cycle is more of about like small pockets of flux and fluidity. It's more about like then only a cycle completes, or it's in also a continuity that happens. And I see this idea of like durability in the fields with the lens of fragility and with the lens of flux and change. Because if that change and flux won't be there, then there is not a possibility of durable situations that we can encounter in life. So this whole idea of like durability, it's important to see it from the position of ephemera and flux and fragility, not from the position of like a desperate attempt to make something solid and unchangeable or permanent, or think always for creating icons, in the name of art, architecture, whatever. So, or I don't know, but that is why this is very important. And I see that field has that power to offer this kind of continuum, this kind of energies, and this kind of like time and spaces for do lot of thinking.
Yeah, we have actually taken all the questions that we had, and I think there are no more questions. So maybe we can call it a conversation. I think this was a really wonderful presentation, Dharmendra, and I think the key things that your presentation offered for us to think is through this notion of ephemerality, and how to think of it as an enabling kind of idea, rather than an anxiety inducing idea. And how do we kind of use the notion of something that is going to disappear as an aspect of building our agency, something to think of systems that lend to another constantly, and constantly therefore keep on having the agency to transform and agility to adapt to emerging situations. I think it is there where all the aspects and notions of care, notions of repair, notions of eventually living life are embedded. So thank you so much for bringing us this school of the field for us to consider closely. Thank you, Dharmendra, and we hope that we are able to.
Thank you so much, Anuj and Prasad and everyone.
Definitely, we hope that we are able to meet in person
Definitely.
when our environment is, more gracious to allow us to move freely. But with that, I would like to kind of close this session.
Sorry to interrupt. I think there are two more questions. There's one question from Ali, and one person in the audience has also raised their hand.
Oh, I think the raising hands were not registered by, in sure, Rupali, please come in. Is Rupali? Yeah, Rupali is here.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay. So no, 1 second. Now let me just go to my gallery. Oh, I'm here. Sorry, I couldn't see myself on the screen. Thanks, Dharmendra. This is really beautiful. And I think again, I think it's you give us also a very interesting way of looking at pedagogy. I mean, you call it the harvest pedagogy, and we've also been looking at this idea of what we call the post-institutional. So in that sense, I think what your sort of presentation also opens up for us is the idea of time, and the idea of a immersive practice. Like you in some ways there are like there's a kind of in some ways decolonization of knowledge, right? Like you have to immerse yourself in the field, and for us, I think field is also kind of metaphorical, like it's not field for us could be the city, field is the context that you are immersed in, right? Like and I think that's kind of wonderful for us. It's not that you are there's a romantic idea that I have to for a harvest ecology I have to always go to another field, but the field is sort of around us. So I think what is very beautiful is the way you kind of bring in a phenomenological kind of reading of the site, a kind of a philosophical reading of the site, and a kind of deep immersive engagement, right? Like the idea of time, the idea of very closely, very, very sort of, observing things in their sort of ephemeral, decolonized ways. Because for us, and I think that is very important for us, because as architecture, there are set templates of, how to build, how to see things. And in some ways, what you do is you sort of destabilize that. You destabilize that for us. So I think this idea of the immersive engagement of the field is something that is very beautiful for us to take back. I just want to also ask you then, how do you, like when you talk about harvest pedagogy, and you talk about the idea of a site, how do you look at the idea of time, and how do you look at the idea of a immersive practice in the field? Particularly, I mean, I was really kind of, when you're also talking about bringing other friends, with you and thinking together. So I just wanted to ask you, what do you mean by, what do you think about the idea of time and this idea of immersion?
Thank you, Rupali. Like talking about the idea of time, it's in realization that is still in the process in my own understanding, because it is an offer that is made by the field itself. When I talk about the industrial and ecological notion of time, when you talk about the agrarian notion of time, when you talk about the rural notion of time, or when you talk about the notion of time from a perspective of a craft person, or from a perspective of a potter. So I'm really interested in those practices to define and to realize the notion of time, that I'm not in practice, So that is a kind of hunger, that is a kind of wish to really see those practices. And because of that, what do you call it, the process of like immersiveness, because of those interests and because of those things, I really love to go to the places or be in the field always, to really see and think and observe and note and talk and converse with the people and also with the things that are around. And it's not the immersiveness is not, that is again only from my side, or from an perspective of a human being. It's a context that is already there, and you have to be there to feel something, to see something. And it's more of like an slowing down, it's more of like in waiting. It's more of like in getting surprised after a long wait. It's more of like an what I can say, like again waiting and getting surprised again, like continuing this cycle. And you don't know like when you get surprised and who will surprise you. So because we don't know that, because I don't know that, that is why it's important to be there. Again, it's more of like an unknown zone. And I think that unknown zone is very important to counter, to feel, to realize, to search, to look for, because that particular thing, those relationships in the field between the entities that exist, physical and non-physical, I really try to make relationship within those fields, and that's how these philosophical readings and notes and forms comes out from there. And I see the whole connections as a process of immersiveness. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. Really looking forward to visiting with you.
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
I've been informed that there was another hand which was raised by Amar Limbu. I'm sorry, I can't see raised hands as a panelist, so you will have to type in your question in the Q&A box, or I don't know if Dipti can make them a panelist, but if Amar wants to come in and share his thoughts. Yes, Amar, you've been given the rights to speak here. If you can switch on your camera and you're mute, so you'll have to unmute and switch on your camera.
Hello.
Hi, Amar. Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry, by mistakenly I just typed the button.
Oh, okay. So,
but it's really interesting. I enjoyed.
Okay. Thank you, Amar.
Yeah, welcome.
Okay. So thank you so much, Dharmendra, for taking these questions. And I thank everyone from the audience for participating so enthusiastically. Our next session for this series, which is Building Agency, will happen on 15th October now. And we have a kind of special session next week, which we'll inform on our website soon. So please keep tuned to our web portals, which is Instagram, Facebook, and website, to keep updated with our upcoming events. So thank you so much, and thank you, Dharmendra, once again.
Thank you, Anuj. Thank you so much.
Thank you.